Good morning. Welcome to the first of our Tag Canada Food Safety webinars, TCI Fridays. That is Tag Canada Info Fridays. I'm Lisa Lupo, the Director of Communications for the Atchison Group and Tag Canada, and I will be your host for the webinar. So Tag Canada is a Canadian-based affiliate of Global Tag with Canadian resident experts and payment in Canadian dollars. We have developed this new webinar series to help you stay informed on food safety issues and concerns that are particular to Canada. But before I introduce our presenter, I have a couple housekeeping items. You will be muted throughout the webinar, but we will address all questions at the end. So please type in any questions that you have into the Q&A section at any time. We're recording the webinar and we will distribute it afterwards to all who registered for this session. We'll also upload it to the TAG YouTube site, which is youtube.com, the Atchison Group, all one word. So now I would like to introduce our presenter. Cameron Prince is the Executive Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and the Managing Director of the Atchison Group, TAG Canada. Welcome, Cam.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Happy Friday.
So go ahead, Cam.
Thank you, Lisa. Um, yeah, this topic today is something that I think is very important to the Canadian food processing sector, particularly in the manufactured foods, which is a very broad category, essentially almost all food processing except for slaughter. Um, can we go back one?
Yeah, I apologize.
Okay. So today, I should mention that we have a lot of experience within TAG Canada with the CFIA. Personally, I was formerly a vice president of operations at CFIA and was behind the development of the Safe Food for Canadians regulations. So since I left CFIA, I've been an auditor for GFSI and BRC in particular, but also did done a lot of work with the Atchison Group. I joined them over 10 years ago, and it's been a very great way to keep up with food safety, food regulatory issues in Canada. And certainly there's lots of activity in Canada. There's a lot of interest internationally in the Canadian system. There's also we find that with being on both sides of the border, that we at TAG Canada are working quite often with U.S. companies trying to export to Canada and Canadian companies exporting to the U.S. And we do a lot of work where there's a liaison with CFIA required. So today we're going to be talking about the CFIA Manufactured Foods Inspection Blitz. And if you're in the manufactured foods area, you will be inspected or you already have. So this will have a direct impact on you. We really want to help you understand what to expect and what it's all about. So we're just going to go through the basics here today. We'll have lots of time for questions at the end. So I'll be also talking about what they found so far at a fairly high level. And actually, it's kind of I wouldn't say it's surprising, but there are lots of findings happening as a result of this blitz. And then we'll talk about next steps after the blitz is over. And I think this is largely speculative because CFIA is not really talking about what's going to come next, but I think we're in a position to kind of speculate about where this might go in the future. Okay, next, please. So why is CFIA doing this in the first place? And I think many people, it's hard to be in the food industry in Canada and not know about the major incident that took place in late 2024. There was a major listeria incident. There were three deaths and dozens of people were sickened. And it was traced back to a plant in Pickering, east end of Toronto. a plant called Jiriki, which uh, was a co-manufacturer for Danone, the international global dairy firm. And the plant produced a lot of different beverages, but in leading up to this incident, the plant had been largely producing plant-based milk, so almond and oat milks, etc., soy milks, all under the Danone Silk brand. So when this happened, it fairly quickly came to light that there had been limited, very limited, if none at all, essentially, uh, limited activity or inspection from CFIA at this facility. And you, the problem was that CFIA was inspection operations was assigning um, inspectors based on um, a risk model, and it's called ERAM, and that stands for Establishment Risk Assessment Model. And it's an algorithm that at the time failed to identify the plant as high risk, which is a kind of a head scratcher because it's a ready-to-eat food. And just because it doesn't come from animal origin doesn't mean that it's any less risk. I think there's a natural tendency to think that foods of animal origin are more of a concern with listeria, but not at all. So a lot of there's a lot of evidence that listeria controls in this facility had failed, and yet there was no CFI inspection. This, of course, became a very high-profile media issue in Canada. And the Globe and Mail was extremely active on this and had a number of feature articles and very much questioning how could this happen? How could CFIA drop the ball on this as they apparently had at the time? So something had to happen here. And when you get an issue like this, so it was decided by the Minister of Health, who is responsible for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, to call, the Minister of Health called for an investigation of the incident, including what went wrong with CFI's failure to inspect. How could this possibly happen? So enter the CFIA Office of the Inspector General. And up until this point, I think it's fair to say that it wasn't common knowledge that this office even existed. It had been set up some time ago. It goes back actually to there was a huge E. coli recall in meats in around 2013-14, JBS plant in Alberta, and that at that time the Office of Inspector General was set up just to make sure that there was oversight. And so this office, which is within CFIA, but very independent, and led by a fellow that I know very well, Scott Rattray. And Scott had previous experience at the Auditor General's office, so he knew how to conduct investigations. It was the right choice because not only did he have a strong audit background, but also he had been a senior person in operations in CFIA and understood the operational side. So Scott and his team did a thorough investigation, and they reported in 2025. There were significant findings, and problems were identified, and it was. I think some people were not surprised. I think others were kind of shocked by what came out of that. That the system was by no means broken, but it sure had some shortcomings. So these needed to be fixed. So the CFIA president at the time committed to act on them immediately. And that is where we ended up with this Blitz. So in October 2025, the report from the Office of the Inspector General came out late summer, I believe, in 2025, and by October, CFIA was into the Blitz, which was generated by the recommendations from the Office of the Inspector General. Okay, next slide, please. So, what did the OIG find that was so concerning? Um, First off, some license holders, their preventive control plans did not appropriately identify potential hazards. And I think this, in retrospect, could have been predicted. And we'll get into this a bit later. But essentially, what was happening is that people were applying for licenses online, and if it was deemed a low risk, the issue was the license was issued online right away. Um, the applicants could tick a box and said they had a preventive control plan and pay their $250 and they got a license. And nobody was checking to see that the preventive control plans or the HACCP plans were adequate. And that, so it's not surprising that we ended up where we were at the time. So there weren't adequate hazard controls in place in all facilities. I mean, many plants were GFSI certified. They'd already been through all this, and it wasn't a concern. But it was those groups of plants that were not great, had some non-compliances, perhaps didn't have the expertise to do this properly. And that's where how we got to this point. So this whole initiative isn't just about the Blitz, it's about a lot more things that needed to be fixed. So another thing was that some license holders uh, did not appropriately identify the ready-to-eat product category. So under Health Canada's Listeria monocytogenes policy, there are categories, and many of you should know how that works. And what was happening was that the plants, some of them were miscategorizing their products according to the policy, which meant they didn't have to do as much testing, they didn't have to have as rigorous an environmental monitoring program. So this means that products that were likely to have listeria in them were not being checked appropriately under the health council, which is it sounds bureaucratic, but it's a pretty serious issue. Um, so observations showed building conditions and equipment. So plants were just not in good condition, was observed. Um, the controls on the issuance of the licenses I referred to had to be strengthened. It was just way too easy to get a Safe Food for Canadians license in the first 5 years of its existence, or first 7 years actually of its existence. Um, and DSDP and IMS, these are just the IT systems that control the inspection. They're the base, the IT framework that CFIA uses for their inspection systems. And those were found to have problems that prevented the effective use of the enterprise risk assessment model. So, in other words, some of the data wasn't getting fed into the risk assessment model, and that was resulting in the flawed level of assessment and allowing plants like the one that was created the listeria problem to go uninspected for a long period of time. And the other problem overall was that complaints are a really important driver of inspection frequencies and how often an inspector has to go visit. And sometimes, if there's multiple complaints, it behooves the inspector to get to that plant and follow up and find out what's going on. Because where there's smoke, there's fire, as simple as that. And so the guidelines on what inspectors were supposed to do weren't clear, and the data was not getting fed into the risk assessment model. So complaints were a whole area where major improvement was needed. The linking of complaints to the rating of the plant by risk. So next, please. So what did the Inspector General recommend? First off, strengthen license approval policy, especially with related to the preventive control plans, because the HACCP program, the preventive controls, that is the foundation of the licensing requirements and the food safety program that CFIA has. So this licensing system had to be improved. Um, there was a recommendation to add an information questionnaire so that plants would give more information rather than what they put in on their license application, so that CFIA could better judge what the risk for these plants were. Um, and the OIG recommended that this system be adjusted to align with CFIA's capacity. And in other words, to put higher priority on higher risk establishments. Now, the system already did that, but clearly it wasn't doing it effectively enough. At the end of the day, there are only so many inspectors. I think it's important to remember that when the Safe Foods for Canadians regulations came in, since that time, there's been certainly money invested in CFIA by the government, but the actual numbers of inspectors has not increased to any great degree. And now we're looking at uh, downsizing across the board in government. Now I know CFIA will not cut frontline jobs, frontline inspection jobs, to try to preserve that capacity. But I guess the point is, it's not going to get bigger anytime soon. So they have to deal with the resources that they have. Um, so another recommendation was to review the compliance promotion tools. And what this is about is really to say maybe CFI didn't do a good enough job when it came to making industry aware of and emphasize that they needed to have preventive control plans. This wasn't just it was almost too easy to get a license. I mean, that's easy for me to say looking back, but it was very successful in that it was no small feat to get licensing brought into Canada under mandatory licensing, but to get everybody to buy on and get in, it was made fairly easy to get a license. But the trouble is that a number of years later, find out that it was too easy, and perhaps some of these plants were not perhaps, definitely some of these plants were not up to snuff. So there was another recommendation was to, and this is an IT technical one, is that the data system didn't properly identify food commodities and made it difficult for industry to feed into the system. So, and it wasn't very accurate. So they needed more accuracy on the categories of products that and commodities that various plants were processing. Improving complaints data system was recommended. Um, Better data entry for better trending and proper support of the risk model. Um, they needed to validate the data types extracted to the risk model. So in other words, they needed a second look or a validation to be sure that the system was working well enough uh, to make sure that those levels of risks assigned to establishments made sense and were based on data and were correct. Um, so it's that internal verification function I think was missing. And just to improve the guidance to inspectors on complaints, it seemed like it was really, there was no framework. It was the complaints came in and some got dealt with and some there was not enough inspection capacity or for whatever reason, not all complaints were captured and investigated to the degree that they should have been. So the OIGs recommended a lot more rigor and policy clarity in that way. Okay, next, please. So how's this blitz being conducted? It's a dedicated team of inspectors from across the country. It's led by an executive who is a regional director. She has just been assigned to manage the team. Her name's Elaine Brown, and she's based in Toronto. Um, Site inspections are going to be done or have been done at every single manufactured food plant. So that's about roughly 2,000 plants. So it's a big job. Uh, Visits are generally, they can be one day, they can even be a whole week, but usually they're 2, 3, 4 days. Plants get notification ahead of time that CFIA is coming. And any non-compliances, this is super important, they are subject to CFI's enforcement policy. And if you're in the business, if you're not up to date on the CFI's enforcement policy, I would highly recommend that you make yourself familiar with it because it's tougher than it used to be. And plants can really get themselves in a hole with CFIA fairly quickly. So it's not like it used to be where CFIA would find a problem, a non-compliance, there would be a corrective action issued, and the plant would submit the corrective action, it would be accepted by CFIA, and everybody moved on until something else happened. Now, those things are being tracked and they accumulate over a 5 year period. And if you hit a certain threshold, a certain number of non-compliances, then you get an escalation of the enforcement. And that can mean more than corrective actions for sure. Definitely warnings can be issued and have been issued. CFI now has the authority to issue fines under the Administrative Monetary Penalties Act, which is had not been used widely for just regular food, but that capacity is there now, and I think that will start to kick in a lot more. And then there can be license suspension, which means you get closed down and then you got to scramble and prove that and you don't get it even if you fix all the issues, you're not going to get your license back very quickly. It takes time, so you could be out of business for weeks or a month. Um, and in some cases, there's cancellation of the license, and we've seen that actually happen recently, that CFI just canceled the license outright. So what is CFI finding so far? Um, they don't have, I mean, this is not, there's no database out there that's publicly available. It's not completely transparent, but I was able to get some information about what they're finding. Obviously, it's protected by individual plants, but certainly trends are there. And one of the biggest trends is important findings is that licenses are not up to date. So plants are doing processes and products that uh, aren't on their license, or they've dropped doing products and processes, and it's still on the license. So the licensing conditions require that that licenses be up to date at all times, so that CFI knows what you're doing. Um, and there are a bunch of things that fall into this category. Changes in product formulations, changes in specifications, changes in processing, actually even change in the management. And as many of you know, when you apply for a license at CFIA, you have to identify the responsible person. So it's connected to a company official or an owner or a senior manager, usually. Well, those positions change, and if the person's no longer with the company, it's absolutely critical that the new person responsible be on the license. They also found inadequate preventive control plans and incomplete hazard analyses. Um, and I mentioned that in a way is not surprising. Um, Lack of adequate sanitation, and I don't think this will surprise anyone that there are sanitation lapses that creep into plant operations, and it's something where the companies always have to be vigilant on. And there was a lot of findings in this blitz of inadequate sanitation, poor equipment design, poor maintenance of equipment, um, non-compliance, as I mentioned before, to the Health Canada Listeria policy, which is really important, especially in ready-to-eat facilities. So overall, the non-compliance rate is about 25% of the plants inspected so far under this blitz um, have some significant non-compliances. Um, Now, not many are to the point where they have to have their license suspended, but there are things that must be fixed. So what should you expect if CFIA inspects your plant? So typically a team of two, sometimes three inspectors will visit for 2 to 3 days, sometimes 4 days. They first off will review on site the details in the license and make sure that everything is up to date in terms of who's responsible on the license, the products produced, the processes, the status of the preventive control plan. Is it up to date? Is the hazard analysis complete and correct? They will always do a walk through the plant. They'll look at sanitation, infrastructure, good manufacturing practices, CCP verifications, and all the records. Um, and they will focus on findings that pose a higher risk. So, in particular, they are going to focus on incomplete or incorrect hazard identification. We had one company that had a very poor pest control. They had a serious pest infestation problem, and that was the main focus in that particular situation. So, if something's not working, they will find it. And just keep in mind, you really have to take this very seriously, and you have to make sure there's availability of a key person, usually the head of food safety quality assurance. Make sure that person is available to work with CFIA and answer all of their questions. Okay, next. So what happens if CFIA finds a problem? Well, for sure, a written report will be provided. So you will get notice. Um, in most cases, there'll be corrective actions required, and there will be deadlines. Uh, I just want to mention that if there are very good reasons why the deadline needs to be extended, you can request an extension of a deadline. Um, and they will grant them. And we have seen this, that deadlines have been extended. So, if there's a major problem with infrastructure and there's a leaky roof and the roofing contractor doesn't isn't available for 3 weeks, or we had another one where this was a real life example where the uh, the doors to the receiving and shipping area were they were they had all kinds of gaps around them, which was adding to the pest control problem. Well, they couldn't get anybody to come and fix the doors for 3 weeks. So CFI will give you some grace, but try not to use that option if you can avoid it. Um, if they find serious problems, particularly things like that not complying with the listeria policy or gross sanitation problems or it could be a number of things. This will be referred to CFIA enforcement, so it won't stay within the inspection realm. It'll go over to a different group in CFIA, which is enforcement, and that's all they do. And once it's in that group, then you're looking at a warning, a written serious warning, fines, license suspension, or cancellation. Um, I would say in most cases, you're going to fall into the corrective action uh, position, and you can avoid getting your license suspended if you can get those corrective actions done effectively and done on time. There's very little forgiveness for not for going over deadlines or not getting it right the first time. So that just keep that in mind. Um, in some cases, plants have voluntarily canceled their license, and this is in a situation where sometimes I think people thought they needed a license and they really didn't. So if somebody was, for example, only operating within a single province, and not shipping outside a province or to the United States or other countries, and they really didn't need a CFIA license in the first place. So, what was the point? They checked the box, they had a preventive control plan, but they didn't actually act on it. So, the easiest option in that case is just cancel the license and move on. In other cases, very small plants were unable to meet the regulatory requirements. Now, there are exemptions for very small businesses on preventive control plans, but they're pretty limited. So, next, please. So, I want to mention something that's here's another office in CFIA that people probably didn't know much about. It's called the Office of Permissions. And this is the group that has the authority, is responsible for the issuance and or amendments to CFIA licenses, SFCR licenses. And due to the findings that the Inspector General had and the Blitz results so far, CFI no longer issues licenses without review. And so that means doesn't matter who you are, you apply for a license online, you low risk or high risk, it will not be issued automatically. If it's a lower risk operation, there is a required, essentially, it's an interview. And this interview is not done by an inspector. It's done by a CFIA administrative official in the Office of Permissions. And the goal of that interview is to make sure that the right commodities are on the license, that the right processes are on the license, that the right responsible party is on the license, and most importantly, that the companies actually have a preventive control plan and they understand it and they are committed to it. So that that is I think is a big improvement because clearly a crackdown was needed. It was just way too easy to have a license and operate under a license and not really comply with the license requirements. So all applicants for a new license or a license amendment will now be interviewed by CFIA to ensure their license information is correct and they're committed to their preventive controls. Yeah, so the key focus is really preventive control plan. Next, please. Something to think about on this Office of Permissions is that as of November, December 2025, it was announced that there would be a service standard of 70 business days for anyone applying for a license or amending a license. Now, and that's 70 business days. Typically, it is not taking that long. And CFIA, I know, is committed. The Office of Permissions, I've spoken to the director, and they are very committed to moving these things along. But with this additional step of checking every license, interviewing for every license, or an amendment, um, there's just more work and it just takes longer. Simple as that. So just give yourself lots of lead time. If you're going to amend your license or you're thinking of applying for a new license, uh, do it a long time ahead as you can. If you're in the meat business or even higher risk uh, fish, mollusk and shellfish, etc., but particularly in meat, um, the process should start at least 6 months before you want to operate. At least 6 months. It takes a long time. There are many more steps in these higher risk categories. There needs to be a full review of the preventive control plan. There need to be a couple of site visits. Then on top of that, you add the time to get it approved and through the Office of Permissions. So it takes a long time. Next, please. Uh, so what this is more or less like next steps. What can we expect here? The Blitz on manufactured foods will end in late October 2026. And I have to give kudos to CFIA, the people involved in this. It really looks like they're on track to pull this off. So a major feat by CFAA and great commitment to get to 2,000 facilities. I'm sorry, my dog is making a noise here. Um, so CFIA will issue a summary report. The OIG and the CFIA president or the health minister. This is just me speculating, but they may make an announcement. They may call for further action if they don't like this. If it looks like there's a lot of ongoing risk, they may double down and ask for more. It's hard to predict. Um, so another thing that's really important to keep in mind that I don't, I'm sorry, you got to excuse me for a minute, folks. I'll just take a second here and let this dog out. I apologize for that. I am back. Uh, I had him well managed before I started this, but I guess not. So there are around 20,000 safe food for Canadian licenses. And keeping in mind that the manufactured food sector is only about 2,000 of those. I hear different numbers. Some say 2,400, but whatever, it's not the full population of licenses. Many of those other ones are importers, and also exporters that maybe brokers that export products they purchase from other companies. Um, so there are a lot of non-manufactured food licenses out there. So the question is, what sector will be blitzed next? Because I think this blitz concept is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. Right now, CFIA isn't saying what the next area will be, but licensed importers would be a logical next step. Uh, I understand that the Office of Permissions has done some checking with just a small sample of importer licenses, and already there have been 10 to 15 importer licenses canceled just based on the telephone interviews because they did not have a preventive control plan or they're not importing what they said they were importing. So I think there will be a real push to look closer at import licenses in a blitz format. That's just speculation on my part, so take it for take it for what it is, my speculation. Uh, Next, please. I think we're done here. Yeah. So this was our first Tag Canada Information Friday, and so I thank everybody for listening. And I want to move over to questions. If anybody has any questions, and Lisa, if you can help me out with this, that'd be
Yep.
great.
Yep, we do have a couple that have been put into the Q&A and then a couple others that came in separate. So the first one is kind of a comment question. It says, this has been really helpful, particularly to understand more of the background as to why the Blitz is occurring. Thank you. Was the industry informed of the Blitz and gaps? It very much seemed we were on the back foot with it all, which was particularly frustrating as our company is a box in, box out distributor. We do not make any changes to the products, but yet we have been subject to the Blitz.
That's a good question. I don't think, I mean, CFI did not hide anything in terms of the Inspector General's findings. That was all that was public. Uh, I think, and that's just my opinion as now an outsider after 10 years away from CFIA. I think there was an opportunity to do a better job of explaining what was going on. However, having sat in that chair, I also see the point of view that this is a regulatory program and the CFIA has a mandate and authority to do this. So yes, it's a good idea to let the regulated parties know what's going on. At the same time, the regulated parties are responsible for meeting the regulations, and I think there may have been a feeling that, hey, these people have a license; it's their job to comply. So I think a bit of both. I'm being sitting on the fence a little bit, I admit, but yeah, they could have done a better job to say what was happening for sure. And I think they did work with groups like the various commodity industry associations, the Meat Council, etc. Import Export Canada was certainly aware of it. So if you were a member of those groups, you would have got some information for sure, but not, in an operation like you're talking about, maybe you're not part of one of those groups and wouldn't not get much information about it. So I think a lot of companies just were contacted by CFIA and it was a complete surprise, which is unfortunate. Okay.
Okay, so
Any
another question. So you did talk about importers in the presentation a bit, but the question is, can you speak to how the inspection blitz applies to importers?
Well, first of all, the first part of that question is, or fundamental of that question is, what are the responsibilities under Safe Food for Canadians rigs for importers? And what they have to have is an importer preventive control program, which means that they have to have records of um, the, they have to have a supplier program to inspect, audit, verify that the supplier of the ingredients, the packaging uh, to their operation, or sometimes final products supplied to the operation are are meet food safety standards. So every single supplier, if an importer is importing uh, final products, retail products, or even bulk products like sugar, flour, um, you have to know everything you can about the food safety program in those suppliers. So that means their HACCP program. Are they certified with GFSI, SQF, or BRC? Uh, are they in good standing with the regulated regulations in the country they're in, or within Canada, or within province, or the United States? Are uh, just it behooves the company to have a full import preventive control program that's really just as rigorous as one in a manufacturing plant. And it has to be auditable by CFIA. It has to be kept up to date. So that is what the focus on a blitz on imports will be more narrow. It will be really on the preventive control plan that they have for their suppliers. That's where the main focus will be. There will be a bit on making sure that the right commodities are on the license, that the right accountable parties on the license, that kind of thing. But it'd be mainly the your audit program for your suppliers.
Okay. A next question says, we have challenges communicating with one of our inspectors, and it's causing issues internally and thwarting compliance. Is there a process to request a different inspector?
Wow, that's that is a that is a tough question. And I've had this question many times as a former VP of Ops. I've had this question. Um, Essentially, it is CFIA's prerogative to assign whatever inspector they want to whatever uh, facility. And it's driven by geography, it's driven by expertise, driven by risk and priority. And you hear it very often that there are tensions or problems between an inspector and a regulated plant. Um, it really, the opportunity really does not exist to request a different inspector. Now, you can go so far as to, if you're documenting things that have happened in your operation, and if there was ever any actual real evidence of misdoing or misapplication of the regulations by the inspector, you have every right to bring that information to their supervisors. But that seldom happens. So it a lot of times we hear regulated parties find that they think the inspector's too picky, or he's too tough, or she's got it, out to get them. I hear that a lot. And I think the most practical advice is to talk to the inspector and try to work out a way for both parties to do the job that they have to do. Requesting a change of inspectors is not going to meet with, it's unlikely to be successful, quite frankly. So,
Okay.
sorry, that's not maybe what you want to hear, but that's the truth.
So another area to address is notification of CFIA. So do they always notify the facility that they will be out, or are there unannounced inspections?
CFI typically announces that they're coming, and unless it's something, like pretty serious, and there may be some criminal activity going on. Obviously, they're not going to announce that. But 99% of the time, they're gonna let you know that they're coming.
Okay. Is there any other, is there any way for the plant to know if they're on the list to be inspected?
Well, if you're in the manufactured food group, you're going to be inspected.
Okay. For this in this licensing blitz.
In this Blitz, yes, if you're in
Okay.
manufacturing, you will be inspected. What you don't know is when, and there's really no way to find out until CFIA tells you they're coming, but they'll usually give you a week or so.
Okay. There is another importer question now. Why are we, as an importer, being subject to a level of granularity that we would expect a manufacturer to be subject to, despite our verification program reviewing suppliers' HACCP, COAs, GFSI certifications, and report? Seems as though we are being expected to review the level of detail that would be reviewed by a GFSI auditor, despite the site already having a GFSI certification.
Um, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you have everything that you need. And I think from just reading between the lines, I think you would do very well on a CFIA audit because you've got everything. If you so why are you being subjected to that? Well, you're a licensed party, and eventually everybody who's got a license of any kind is going to get inspected. So I would have to hear a bit more detail of exactly what the problem is. But I mean, I really don't. Importers are part of the whole inspection program, and imported foods introduce a lot of risk, just like any other food, and perhaps some would argue more because of the unknown or origin of some of these, and being manufactured in places where inspection systems are not as well developed. So imports are definitely going to be under scrutiny. I think the other part of it is that many importers who, when they got their license, really they were simply traders. They did not have an import preventive control program. They simply bought on the open market and bringing goods into Canada, and without really knowing the origin of the goods in terms of their food safety programs under which they were manufactured. So that's trying to get at that I think it's fair to say that the expertise in the import sector was far less than it was in the domestic processing sector. Now, clearly, there's some outstanding importers that have very vigorous systems, so I'm in no way criticizing them, but certainly there are some that don't have very much in the way of inspection control systems and supplier approval programs. So, I mean, that's why importers are likely to be looked at.
Okay, this question actually goes back to the first question that was about if they can change inspectors or request that. And they asked, do you think it is perhaps that inspector's interpretation of our program?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, inspectors are humans, and you're going to sometimes you're going to get inspector maybe is new to a sector, maybe is learning. Um, there's all kinds of reasons why there might be some inconsistency in application of inspection rules. I have to say though that CFIA has worked very, very hard for the last decade or more to bring more consistency to the delivery of inspection programs. If you're having problems with an individual inspector, my advice is to try to work those out. Try to come to a better understanding. An adversarial relationship, an inspector to a facility is not a good thing. Um, it can lead to problems for the plant, and after all, the inspector's just trying to do their job. Um, they're and certainly in certain categories like in meat, inspectors are rotated for that reason.
Okay. So we do want to thank everyone for participating, but Kim, I would kind of ask one last question here. If there's, what would be your take-home points that you would want everyone to remember from this? What are the important key points of this webinar?
Um, I think the main one is to look at well, first off, clearly make sure you have the investment and in time and effort and have a very good preventive control program if you have a CFI license. That's the most important thing that you need to do. And it sometimes requires recognition by the ownership and the leadership of companies that this is important and that actually a business can be jeopardized if they don't follow this, because eventually CFIA, I mean, is going to be knocking on your door and if they find things, it will make your life more complicated for sure. There was a bit of a holiday on this whole thing when the regulations were brought in, licensing was required. The pandemic hit, there wasn't as much inspection, there was not as much enforcement, and people didn't think thought everything was fine, and now you're getting a bit of a crackdown, and just be ready for it. That's all. It's not hard. It's not anything unusual. Um, and if I can be so bold to put a plug in for the Atchison Group Canada, that we've helped a lot of companies with this, helped them navigate through this. So if you do have any problems with this, we certainly know how to fix food safety programs, and we know how to deal with CFIA for sure. Thank you, Lisa.
And thank you, Cam, and thank you for all the participants for joining in. And we will be sending a follow-up email with the recording and the location on the YouTube if you are interested or have anyone else you'd like to pass it on to. So thank you all for coming, and this webinar is finished.
Thank you, everyone.